you know something strange about human experience that nobody really talks about? There's a specific kind of loneliness that only exists in crowded rooms. You know the one. You're standing at a party, or sitting in a classroom, or walking through a busy street, and everyone around you is laughing, talking, living, and you feel like you're watching it all happen through glass. Not because you're physically separated from them, but because somehow, in a room full of people, you've become invisible. Maybe you are someone like that. Maybe you've stood in circles where conversation flowed around you like water around a stone. Maybe you've raised your hand to speak and watched as eyes slid past you to someone else. Maybe you've learned to arrive late and leave early, to stand near walls, to perfect the art of being present without being seen. And here's the question nobody asks. Why? Why can you be surrounded by people and still feel profoundly, achingly alone? It's easy to assume this is just shyness, or social anxiety, or introversion, and maybe those things are part of it, but that's not the full picture. Because what we're talking about isn't just about being quiet or preferring solitude. It's about something deeper. It's about the difference between being unseen, where others simply don't notice you, and feeling invisible, where you've learned to make yourself disappear. There's a psychology to this, a reason why some people can stand in the center of a crowd and feel like they're watching from the outside. A reason why connection feels like standing on the wrong side of a window, always looking in, never quite knowing how to open the door. Beneath the surface, there's an entire psychology of voluntary withdrawal and involuntary disappearance, of people who have become so skilled at fading into the background that even they've forgotten what it feels like to be fully present. So let's talk about what it really means to feel invisible in crowds, not because there's something to fix, but because maybe, just maybe, you deserve to understand why you feel this way. Here's what psychologists have found something fascinating about people who feel invisible in social spaces. They don't just become invisible. They often choose invisibility, even if that choice happens so far below conscious awareness that it doesn't feel like a choice at all. Think about it. When you walk into a room full of people, what's the first thing you do? For most people, it's automatic scan for familiar faces, gauge the energy, find your place. But for you, you're calculating. You're reading the room like it's a text you need to analyze. Where can I stand that's close enough to seem engaged, but far enough to avoid attention? Who's talking to whom? What's the safest route through this space? You've become an observer, a watcher, someone who experiences social situations from a slight distance, always aware of the gap between you and everyone else. And here's what's often misunderstood. This isn't passive. This is social self-preservation. It's hypervigilance, a state where your nervous system is constantly monitoring for threat, for rejection, for the moment when you might say the wrong thing or be too much or not enough. Psychologists call this adaptive withdrawal. It's your brain's way of protecting you from something it perceives as dangerous, not physical danger, social danger, the kind that lives in sideways glances and conversations that stop when you approach and invitations that never come. So you withdraw before you can be rejected. You become invisible before someone can make you feel unseen. The paradox is brutal. You crave connection. You want to be part of the laughter, the easy conversation, the sense of belonging. But every instinct you have tells you that the safest way to navigate social spaces is to take up as little room as possible, to be present but not really there, to exist in the margins. Silence becomes strategy, stillness becomes armor, and slowly, so slowly you might not even notice it happening, you become the audience member who forgot they bought a ticket to their own life. So where does this begin? When did you learn that not being noticed felt safer than being seen? For many people, it starts early, maybe in childhood, maybe in adolescence, those brutal years when social hierarchies form and everyone's trying to figure out where they fit. Think back, can you remember a moment when being yourself felt dangerous? When you said something with enthusiasm and were met with silence or mockery? When you walked into a room and felt every eye assess and dismiss you in seconds? When you were told directly or through the cruel language of exclusion that you were too much or too little or too different? Maybe you were the kid who cared too deeply about things other kids didn't care about, or the one whose interests marked you as strange, or the one whose family didn't have the right clothes, the right house, the right anything. Maybe you experienced bullying, or maybe it was subtler than that, just a consistent, low-grade sense that you didn't quite belong, that everyone else had received some manual on how to be a person that you never got. And here's what happens in those moments. Your brain makes a calculation. It decides that visibility equals vulnerability, that being seen means being hurt, that the safest strategy is to become small, quiet, unnoticeable. So you adapt. You learn to read facial expressions with the precision of a code breaker. You become fluent in the micro movements of social rejection, the slight turn of a shoulder, the wandering eye, the pause before someone responds. You develop an early warning system for discomfort, and you learn to disappear before it arrives. You become the expert reader of rooms, the calculator of risks, the ghost who learned to haunt their own life. And the truly painful part, this worked. Invisibility protected you. It kept you safe from the particular kind of pain that comes from being seen and then rejected. So your brain learned, this is how we survive social spaces. This is what we do. Years pass. The original threat might fade. You're no longer that kid in the cafeteria with nowhere to sit. But the pattern remains, carved into your nervous system like a groove worn into stone. People see you as quiet, maybe a little shy. Maybe they describe you as chill or easygoing or independent. They don't know that quiet isn't peace. They don't see the cost. Because here's what living in invisibility actually looks like from the inside. It's standing in a group conversation, having something to say, feeling it build in your chest, and then watching the moment pass. Someone else speaks. The conversation moves on, and you're left with words that die in your throat again and again until you stop forming them altogether. It's the exhaustion of constant self-erasure. Every social interaction requires a calculation. How much of myself can I show? How much is safe? Will this be too much? Will anyone care? There's a concept psychologists talk about called social translucency, being physically present but psychologically absent. You're in the room, but you're not really there. Your body shows up, but you've learned to keep your actual self at a distance, protected behind layers of careful neutrality. And people read this as simple quietness. They think you're just introverted, that you prefer solitude. They don't understand that you're not choosing solitude, you're managing a constant, grinding fear of what happens when you're actually visible. Here's what research on loneliness tells us. Some of the loneliest people are those surrounded by others. Because loneliness isn't just about being alone. It's about not being known. It's about having relationships where you're seen but not understood, where people interact with the version of you that's safe and digestible, never the complicated truth underneath. You carry a specific kind of grief that's hard to name. The grief of being fundamentally misunderstood, of knowing that people think they know you quiet, easy, no drama, when really they're interacting with your camouflage. You're not antisocial, you're differently social. You're someone who needs safety before vulnerability, who needs to know the ground is solid before taking a step. But the world doesn't always make space for that. The world rewards people who can walk into rooms with easy confidence, who can talk to strangers without their hearts racing, who seem to navigate social spaces like they're swimming through water instead of wading through mud. So you watch them, and you wonder what it would feel like to be that free. But here's where it gets even more complicated. Here's the paradox at the heart of feeling invisible. When someone does notice you, really notice you, try to draw you out, shine attention your way, it's uncomfortable, almost unbearable. You wanted to be seen, you've craved it, but now that the spotlight's on you, your entire system screams danger. Psychologists call this spotlight anxiety. It's the sensation that when people look at you, they're not just seeing you, they're examining you, judging you, finding all the ways you fall short. The attention you wanted becomes the thing you need to escape. There's a deeper mechanism here, something neuroscientists have identified in how our brains process social interaction. For most people, positive social attention activates the brain's reward system. It feels good to be noticed, to be included. But for people who have learned to associate visibility with vulnerability, that same attention triggers the threat detection system instead. Your brain treats being seen the way it would treat standing on the edge of a cliff. So you're caught. You fade into invisibility because it's safer, but the invisibility itself becomes its own prison. You want connection, but connection requires visibility, and visibility feels like threat. The catch-22 is exhausting. You want to be seen, but you fear what people will see. You've built such perfect camouflage that even you've forgotten what you look like underneath. And here's what's even more interesting. Over time, the invisibility becomes part of your identity. You start to define yourself by it. I'm just someone who's quiet. I'm not good in groups. I'm better one-on-one. These aren't just observations, they're stories you tell yourself to make sense of the pattern, to give it meaning, to make the isolation feel less like something that's happening to you and more like something that's just who you are. But what if it's not who you are? What if it's just what you learn to do to survive? Think about it. In different contexts, with one close friend, or online where there's distance and control, or in spaces where you feel genuinely safe, you're not invisible at all. You're funny, thoughtful, present. The invisibility isn't constant. It's context-dependent. It's a response to environments where your nervous system has learned to brace for impact. You haven't disappeared. You've just learned to make yourself small in situations where smallness once kept you safe. So let's be clear about something. This doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean there's something fundamentally wrong with you that needs to be fixed. What you're experiencing is a sophisticated, intelligent response to environments that felt or still feel unsafe. Your invisibility isn't a character flaw. It's a coping mechanism that served a purpose. It protected you when you needed protection. And here's what people don't often acknowledge. There are hidden strengths in the psychology of invisibility. You've developed observation skills most people never cultivate. You notice things the way someone's face changes when they're uncomfortable, the group dynamics others miss, the unspoken tensions in a room. You've learned to read between lines because you've had to. That's not weakness, that's a kind of intelligence. You've developed empathy because you know what it feels like to be unseen. You're often the person who notices when someone else is struggling, who makes space for the quiet person in the group, who sees people others overlook. You've developed depth. While others were practicing small talk, you were learning to think deeply, to sit with complexity, to be comfortable with silence and introspection. You have an internal world that's rich and complicated, even if others don't get to see it. And maybe most importantly, you've maintained a sense of authenticity. You haven't learned to perform a false self just to fit in. You've stayed quiet rather than pretend. That takes courage. even if it doesn't feel like it. So let me offer you a different frame. Maybe your invisibility isn't a failure to show up. Maybe it's a refusal to show up inauthentically. Maybe it's your system's way of saying, I'm waiting for spaces that are actually safe. I'm waiting for people who are actually worth the risk of being seen. That's not pathology, that's wisdom. The question isn't, what's wrong with me that I feel invisible? The question is, what kind of spaces and relationships would allow me to feel safe enough to be visible? And here's the truth that nobody tells you. You don't owe the world your visibility. You don't owe strangers at parties your full self. You don't owe anyone access to the parts of you that you've learned to protect. Invisibility has been your armor, and maybe, in certain contexts, it still needs to be. That's okay. Think back to that image from the beginning. You, standing in a room full of people, feeling like you're watching through glass. Here's what I want you to know. Your presence matters even when you feel unseen, even when you're quiet, even when you're standing at the edge of the room. Observing rather than participating, you're still there, you still count. The invisibility you feel isn't the truth of who you are. It's a strategy you learned. And strategies can change when the context changes. Not because you're forcing yourself to be different, but because you've found people and spaces where visibility doesn't feel like standing on the edge of a cliff. Maybe that's one person. Maybe it's an online community. Maybe it's a small group where you can be seen incrementally, where you can test the waters of visibility without drowning in spotlight anxiety. You don't have to figure this out alone. You don't have to suddenly become someone who walks into rooms with easy confidence. You just have to know that the invisibility you've carried isn't permanent. It's conditional, and the conditions can change. So the next time you find yourself fading into the background, wondering why connection feels so hard, remember this. Being invisible doesn't mean you aren't there. It doesn't mean you don't matter. It doesn't mean you're somehow less than the people who seem to take up space so easily. Sometimes it just means you're waiting for someone who knows how to look, waiting for a space that feels safe enough, waiting for the moment when visibility stops feeling like vulnerability and starts feeling like coming home. And until that moment comes, your invisibility is not your failure. It's your protection. It's your intelligence. It's the part of you that knew how to survive when survival required becoming small. You're still here. You're still present, even when you feel like you're standing on the wrong side of the glass. That matters more than you know.